Welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us here at LTV. Just go on the website, ltveh.org, and look for videos. You'll find us under The Writer's Dream because that's the name of our show. We're also on Facebook. The page is The Writer's Dream. And we're also on YouTube. Look for my name, Linda Maria Frank. Click on my picture and you'll see all our videos. If you're a reader or a writer, there is a lot of great information about producing a book, whether it's writing it or if you just enjoy reading it. Today's guest is Paul Pitcoff. He has written Cold War Secrets. We have as our host today Jack Bilello, who's done many shows, especially ones with historical perspectives. And I do hope that you enjoy the show. So take it away, Jack.
This is The Writer's Dream. I'm Jack Bilello. I am the host of the program this afternoon. And our guest is Paul Pitcoff, who's written a marvelous, marvelous memoir. And we're going to be talking about that memoir, Cold War Secrets, and a few other things. To begin with, welcome, Paul. It's good to see you here.
Nice to be
and
here.
I'd like to ask you, because I was curious, this is called The Writer's Dream. People who come on the show are all writers or illustrators, and your publisher, the Momentum Inc. Press, sounded very intriguing to me because it said that the whole idea, the thrust of the press was to try to avoid the commercialization of art. Can you tell us a little more about the Momentum Inc. Press? Because I think a lot of our people who would be interested in something like that.
Well, a good deal of the book came about because I was in a workshop with a bunch of authors, and most of them similarly situated as me in the sense that we had lived a full life and we were this was another phase of our life, and we wanted to write. And we wanted to write the best books that we could write. And we decided that we didn't want to go commercial, and we would make our own imprint. And we felt that the books were well vetted because we went through each of us went through our full book in the workshop. And rewrote and rewrote. And then we, those of us who are in Momentum, we use an outside editor as our final vetting of the book.
Very good.
And also the same designer who helped us understand, because we didn't understand any of the process of getting it on Amazon and getting it out to the public. And I can say that my first experience with publishing was I published a book through Rutgers University Press, and it made me kind of nuts about commercial publishing because I felt they didn't do enough about the book, and that all the publicity that we had to do in promoting the book, we had to do ourselves on that book, even though, and we got a very wonderful advance. We got $7,500, which I thought was quite remarkable, but they did nothing to promote the book except that we had to do it. And so I thought, well, at my age, I didn't want to spend a number of years looking for an agent and going through all that. And so the Momentum Inc. has been a wonderful resource because we all are supportive of each other. We've now published about 5 or 6 books, different authors, and it's just been a wonderful experience.
If someone who is watching the TV show would be interested in the press, the Momentum Inc. Press, could they have access to contact somebody, or, or is it just a closed 5 or 6?
Well, it comes through our workshop. We continue to run the workshop. So somebody would probably have to want to come into our workshop. And
Okay.
occasionally we do
Okay.
have openings in the workshop when we look for people who are seriously interested in doing it. And the workshop is quite intense. We meet twice a month.
Okay.
And we submit long pieces, and everybody does a critique on each
Good.
piece.
Good. Well, I hate to start off on a sour note, Paul, but I find that much of the book, passages and parts of the book are half-baked. And I have a question, because it is half-baked. Did Florence ever learn to cook a potato full? Or were they all half-baked? That's what I want to know.
Well,
Because this is throughout the book. Your mother making dinner could not bake a potato. What's going on?
my mother was, I think at the age of 8, she decided very definitely she did not want to be a work-at-home mother, or even a mother, as far as I know. And cooking was not something that she liked doing or wanted to do. And did she ever learn? No.
But she had a life. You know what I found amazing? That both you and your mom both became full professors without a PhD. I think that's remarkable, really. Both of you, mom and son. She became a social worker, right? And her work was in social work, and you in communications at Delphi, and you both became full professors, which is really good.
One of the interesting things about writing the memoir, I've lived with myself for 77 years, and I didn't see a lot of patterns that emerged for me until after I wrote the book. So it's sort of interesting. You would think that I would have picked that up immediately in my life. And the last episode of my life, I worked, I developed a program for kids in foster care.
Yes.
And in many ways, that could be thought of as social work, although I never thought of it as that. And then I thought, too bad my mother wasn't alive, because she would see that I was sort of almost ended my professional life in a similar kind of career as hers.
Yeah. But both your parents, reading the memoir, were very interesting people. And I could see why you're an interesting guy, too, because of your background. You've had a tremendous, varied background. I mean, you were a professor of communications, you were a lawyer, and you gave up law after 6 months.
I always tell people.
You went through how many years of law school?
I went to 3 years of law school.
And then gave it up after 6 months. But you went on to something that was really worthwhile, purposeful, working with youngsters in foster care and trying to deal with that issue, which was really, really good. Paul, I remember one of my favorite characters, Woody Allen. In one of his movies, I think it was Radio Days, he would ask his father what his father did for a living. And his father would never answer him. And half the movie was he trying to find out what his father did for a living. And his father would give him a shot in the head and say, mind your own business. Did you have this curiosity about what your father, I know he was an electrician, and apparently a very good one, but did you have a curiosity right from the beginning about what he did as prior to becoming an electrician, or what he did in terms of his political interests?
I don't know whether it was on my part as a young boy, it was denial or not, because I had heard stories from the time I was fairly young that my father had done union organizing. But I knew my father only as an electrician, And so I never followed that up. As I write in the book, it was sort of a don't ask, don't tell family. And I think by the time I was ready to start asking questions, I realized I never got a straight answer anyway. So it is curious to me that I never pushed on that. As you know, in the novel, in the book, it wasn't until I was 19 or 20 when I happened to come across a newspaper article about my father that I realized that he had a totally different life. And
Like a secret life, huh?
yeah, and I wasn't prepared for it. And as I started off the book, when I was 11, the FBI would come to the house. And I was so naive about my parents that I thought, well, maybe my father was a bank robber. I mean,
They just happened to be in the neighborhood.
yeah. When I asked my mother, she said, oh, they just happened to be in the neighborhood.
No.
So I guess I sort of learned not to ask. So it's a good question. But I always thought he was an electrician. And what's interesting, as you know, in the book I did a lot of research and I found out a lot about what he did. And he did do spying and dangerous stuff. But the thing that was so much more interesting to me after a while, I mean, the spying and stuff really got to me. It was electric. But the thing that in some ways stunned me the most was when he, before he was an electrician, his work at Amtog, which was the Russian trading organization, which was the precursor for their embassy in the United States, he worked as an administrator. And I always thought my father, had worked as an electrician, and I was very proud of that. And I never knew he had any experience in doing, what would be called a white-collar job. And part of his job was legitimate. It was probably an interesting job, and he never talked about that to me. And I regretted that I never knew that about him.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he joined the Communist Party in 1926. He was like 27 at the time, and he stayed in about 8 or 9 years. But he dropped out of it because of his disaffection with Stalin and what Stalin was doing. I mean, he hated Stalin. I mean, that was quite intriguing. I thought maybe, but I don't think so, that when Stalin signed the pact with Hitler, the Nazi Soviet pact, I thought a lot of communists in this country became very, very disillusioned and very angry. But I don't think that was the reason your father, because I think he dropped out before that pact.
Well, that was the one thing that gave me solace is that he dropped out in 1933, which was way before the pact and before many people turned from the Communist Party. But he was already got wind that Stalin was butchering many people and many dissidents. And one of the most interesting characters that I came across in doing the research for the book, because one of the things that I enjoyed about doing the memoir was the research, because I didn't know much about the time and certainly about his stuff.
The history of that time.
And there was a character, Juliet Points, who was a professor at Barnard in history, and before that, she was one of the founding members of the American Communist Party. And in 1932, I think Stalin invited her to visit the Soviet Union, and she was an avid communist, and she came back and told people that what Stalin was doing was just horrible, and she was about to write a book about, the terror that was going on there. And then she was assassinated.
She was assassinated.
And she was a friend of my father's. So my father was getting that kind of information.
And Joe Zack was another. See, I had never heard of Juliet Poins and Joe Zack, and they were very intriguing for me to find out about them. He was another. Was he a friend of your father's or someone your father knew?
Well, what's interesting about my experience in writing the book is that I got leads about these characters some of these characters in the testimony. And I didn't believe it, because I didn't believe anything my father ever said, so why would I believe anything in a testimony? So I looked them up. Luckily, when I started doing the book, there was Google and everything, and the story about Julia was confirmed. It's actually on the website of Columbia University now. Jozak was somebody that would come to the house, and he was this roly-poly, very sweet guy, and seemed nondescript, and then when I started to read about him, he started the Communist Party in South America. He was this incredible radical, and the United States tried to deport him. The Communist Party thought he was more radical than they were, and he was a close friend of my father.
That's interesting. Yeah. And his wife and child were disappeared in the Soviet Union, right?
Yeah.
They were, and
I think that was the reason he turned, was because when he started to having some questions about the Communist Party, his wife and child were still living in Russia, and they were sent.
They went to one of the gulags and never heard from again.
again.
Yeah. Now, George Watt? You talk. That's another interesting. You and your family knew a lot of interesting people. Tell us a little bit about George Watt and the Spanish Civil War and the Lincoln Brigade and so on.
Well, George Watt was a wonderful accident for me, because for my whole life, and the memoir deals with that, I felt a good deal of shame that my father was, when I was growing up, he was a reactionary. He was a Republican who, when I was a kid, I thought it was his vote that elected Eisenhower. And they sent me, my parents sent me to a school that was basically a communist school, Little Red Schoolhouse, and we would learn, it was very leftist, and so I was ashamed that any of my classmates would know that my father, voted for Ike when they all wanted Stevenson, and then when I was in college, that's when I discovered that my father had actually testified in 1939 at UAC, and I was brought up to believe the House Un-American Activities Committee was just the worst, most hideous thing
reactionary
in our history. And I was not a very good history student, which I shouldn't tell you since that's your subject. But I didn't, when I read the article, I didn't do the timeline. And when he testified was 39, and the UAC that I was more familiar with and was so condemned was in the 50s.
Yeah. Yes.
And when I saw the article that my father had testified, my shame increased, and I didn't want anyone in my life to know that he had testified. And I didn't even read the article that fully. It was in the New York Times. And
it's in the book, the whole article from the Times. The Times articles in your book.
Yeah, and that basically he was testifying about how Amtog was the headline in the New York Times was Amtog is a beehive of Soviet spies, and my father was a Soviet spy.
Now the job that you got as a messenger, you were assigned to deliver something at Amtog. That was just accidental, and your father, when he heard that you were going to Amtog, he said, I don't want you to go there. Don't ever go there again. Unfortunately, you never were asked to go there again.
And I never knew why he would be so upset. I knew that, I always knew that as a young child, I knew he abhorred communism. Abhorred it. I mean, it was like a visceral thing.
Yeah.
But Amtog, when I had a job as a messenger and I was delivering tickets to Amtog, I just thought it was an innocent, they were a trading organization. And I thought he would be interested that, I met with a couple of Russians and everything like that. Well, he went berserk, but he didn't tell me why. And it turned out that I learned in writing the book that he worked for them and he helped facilitate some of the Soviet spies that came over. And he was actually recruited by the KGB to be trained in Moscow to be a better spy.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. And
So-
he really feared for his life when he then testified at the House Un-American. Morris Dees, was it?
Martin Dees was, it was
Yeah,
called,
Martin
yeah, it was
Dees.
called the
And
the Dees
he knew
Dice
that other
Committee.
people had been assassinated who had crossed Stalin. I mean, Stalin went to Mexico to kill Trotsky, for crying out loud. I mean, not that he did, but he.
Well, it was very interesting, is when I asked my mother, what happened was my mother innocently said to me, now you know how to use microfilm. Why don't you look up, there's an article about Dad in the New York Times, and she gave me the date, and I looked it up, and oh my God, the spying and the UAC and everything. I went home and I said, Mom, why did Dad testify? And she said to me, oh, they would have killed him if he didn't testify. And so I just thought that was more hyperbole, that just like
Yeah.
the FBI happened to be in the neighborhood. But in doing the book, I talked with a historian of the times, and he called it the veil of visibility. He said the Soviets could get to anybody, anywhere in the world, if they felt they were a traitor, and kill them. And one of the only ways you could escape that was not by hiding, but was by making public what you knew, because then the Soviets would have less incentive to assassinate you, because it would be almost confirmation that what the person was revealing was true.
Yeah.
And to this day, even with all the research, I'm not sure exactly why he testified, whether he was compelled to testify, whether he really was fearing for his life. I don't really know. Because what's interesting is that he left the Communist Party, but even after he testified, he was considered a security risk because he still belonged to the American Labor Party, and he was still very pro-labor, and the federal government
He
still
was
thought...
a champion of economic and social justice,
Yeah.
I think, from what I've gathered in
And-
the book. He fought the good fight in that regard. Your mom was very interesting to me, too. At the beginning of the book, you could see, well, the FBI was here, they just happened to be in the neighborhood, and other things. And then you realize that she was fearful of your father's life, and maybe yours, and so on, because Joe Zach's wife and
Right.
child were gone, disappeared. But she was also, there was a lot of some good humor in there. There's a scene when I think you were on vacation at this hotel that had been, no longer in use, and kind of your dad took you there, and your mom, you didn't get back to where you were supposed to be, and she got hysterical, and she called the state troopers and a priest, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I got the kick out of, she really developed a great fondness for the priest that came to comfort the family and her and try to ease her hysteria. And she liked the priest so much, she said to him, "You're so good as a priest, why don't you become a rabbi?" I thought I got a really big kick out of that. And so anyway, that
Well,
was-
what happened was, it was interesting. We were vacationing in Woodstock, and it was a 2-week vacation. And there was an abandoned hotel at the top of a high mountain called Mount Overlook. And my father had been told about it, and I heard about it, and they said if you go to the top, you can see 7 states. And I was a little kid. I think I was 8 years old or something like that. So my father said to my mother, we're going to go up to the top of the mountain. We're going to see this hotel that was abandoned, and then we're going to come down. And, and she didn't want to come, and he said, we'll be down in an hour. And what happened was we went up, and it was a long hike, and we didn't come down for like 3 or 4 hours.
I know, yeah, yes.
And
yes.
so after an hour, and my mother was very good at this, is every time my father was missing, she would call the police.
Because probably of her fear.
Because of her anxiety.
Yeah.
And they sent state troopers because she became hysterical. And she said, the state troopers have to find us. You know, we were only gone for 2 hours, but they told her there were bears on the mountain and everything like that. And the state troopers, you know, they couldn't handle this, and they weren't going to go searching for us. So they called the priest as a backup. And so when my father and I arrived, there were all these people around my mother and this priest, and and they were trying to calm down my mother and everything like that. And she made a whole big scene, and my father didn't like the scene, and and I was, I didn't understand what was going on. And it wasn't until I did research on this book. So we would tell the story all the time about my mother being hysterical, but that hotel was the first meeting, organizing meeting of the American Communist Party.
That's exactly right, yes.
And so it had this symbolic theme in her mind, and Joe Zack was actually at that meeting. So she knew about this, and obviously my father must have known about it, but they just took me, and my father just took me up, this would be a nice hike. But he probably was doing it for more sentimental reasons about the forming of the Communist Party.
Well, Paul, we are just at the end, and I enjoyed this thoroughly, and I want to thank you, and I recommend the book highly because it gives you a great picture of that period, the McCarthy era, House Un-American Activities, and what people who were blacklisted and blackballed had to go through, as well as others. So thank you very much. And
well, thank you. It's been nice talking with you.
Right, same here. Same here.
Appreciate it.